No.
It's no use, Joe.
Please
Joe, we've
don't.
got to have it out.
No.
I have
Hey.
loved you ever since I've known you, Joe. I couldn't help it. And I tried to show and you wouldn't let me, which is fine.
No.
But I must make you here now and give me an answer because I cannot go on like this any longer.
A Little Women sequel might be on the horizon, and there's already a story ready to dive into. Back in December 2019, Greta Gerwig, known for her acting and now directing, gave us her fresh take on Louisa May Alcott's classic novel. Her version struck a perfect balance between staying true to the original story and adding a modern twist. Since Little Women pulled in glowing reviews, just like Gerwig's debut film Lady Bird, a follow-up feels like a natural next move. The movie boasts an impressive cast, including Saoirse Ronan as Jo March, Emma Watson as Meg, Florence Pugh as Amy, Eliza Scanlon as Beth, Laura Dern as Marmee, and Timothée Chalamet as Laurie. It sticks closely to Alcott's tale, where the March sisters navigate life, love, and finding their paths. Jo, ever the independent spirit, isn't ready to settle down just yet. She's too focused on her creative dreams, while her sisters focus more on building their futures in Massachusetts. The film's ending perfectly captures the spirit of Louisa May Alcott's work and life while giving the story a modern twist. Even though Alcott had to tie up her novel with a neat little romance, she was a bold and independent woman for her time. That energy shines through in Little Women, and Greta Gerwig makes sure it's front and center. That's probably why the film feels so fresh and relevant, because Jo, Alcott, and Gerwig all share the experience of being women, writing their own stories and understanding their value. On the Directors Guild of America's podcast, Gerwig explained, "Part of what I wanted to do was 150 years later give Louisa May Alcott an ending she might have liked. I thought if we can't do this now, then we've really made no progress and should all hang our heads." She added that the film's structure came from wanting to weave in this idea of authorship, how we all shape and reshape the story of who we are even if we're not writers. By adding a meta-narrative to the book's ending, Gerwig has definitely achieved her goal. She has created a version of Little Women that speaks powerfully to a new generation while honoring Alcott's legacy. In Greta Gerwig's Little Women, she gives the story a modern twist by reworking the ending. Instead of Jo being passive about her book deal, we see her negotiating a better financial arrangement, putting her career first over romantic cliches. The film wraps up with a perspective that feels more like Jo's vision than Louisa May Alcott's original conclusion. If a sequel happens, it'll likely be called Little Men, which follows Alcott's timeline. After publishing Little Women in two parts in 1868 and 1869, Alcott continued the story in 1871 with Little Men and wrapped up the trilogy with Jo's Boys in 1886, 2 years before her passing at 55. Little Men shifts focus from the March sisters to Plumfield Estate School, where Jo and her husband, Friedrich Baer, now work as teachers. Set over 6 months, the story explores Jo's influence on a new generation of kids and their intellectual growth. While Little Women spotlights family bonds, Little Men dives into mentorship and education. The last time it hit the big screen was back in 1940 with a Canadian TV series adaptation in 1998. A Gerwig-directed version could bring fresh life to this lesser-known part of the trilogy. If we're diving into the story of Little Men, it kicks off with Nat Blake, a shy orphan with a habit of telling fibs, arriving at Plumfield School. The school is run by Professor Baer and Mrs. Josephine Baer, formerly Jo March. Nat quickly wins over everyone, including the 10 boys at the school and the Baers themselves, with his charm and his fiddle-playing skills, which he learned from his father. Mrs. Baer tells Nat that every Sunday she evaluates the kids' behavior for the week, and Nat is determined to make her proud. Right away, Nat notices Plumfield isn't your average school. Saturdays include 15-minute pillow fights to keep mischief at bay during the week, and each kid has their own garden and pet, encouraging independence. Nat befriends Tommy Bangs, the school troublemaker who raises chickens and lets Nat keep one egg out of every dozen they find. Nat dreams of saving enough money from his eggs to buy a violin. He also becomes close to Demi and Daisy, the twin children of Meg, Jo's sister. When Nat's fibbing gets out of hand, Mr. Bayer comes up with a clever way to fix it. Every time Nat lies, he has to strike Mr. Bayer's hand with a ruler. It's tough, but playing his violin and spending time with Daisy help him get through it. Daisy, who's often left out of the boys' games, gets a surprise, a tiny working kitchen gifted by Mrs. Bayer and Laurie. She starts hosting little parties for the boys with her cooking, which becomes a hit. Things shake up when Nat's wild friend Dan arrives at Plumfield. At first, Dan thinks the other boys are too soft, so he leads them into all kinds of trouble: boxing, smoking, drinking, and even gambling. When one of his antics causes a fire, Dan steps up to help put it out but is sent anyway to live on a farm as a consequence. Meanwhile, a new girl named Nan comes to Plumfield to be Daisy's companion, but she's even more of a tomboy than Jo was at her age, causing her own share of chaos. Dan eventually runs away but returns to Plumfield with a broken foot. Mrs. Bayer takes care of him and he starts to bond with everyone again. When Laurie donates a natural history museum to the school, Dan becomes its curator thanks to his love for the outdoors. One day during a berry picking trip, Nat promises to look after little Rob but loses track of him and they miss the wagon home. Though everyone is relieved when they're found, Mrs. Bayer teaches Nat a lesson by keeping him tied to a string in one room the next day. Later, Laurie and Amy's daughter Beth visits and her sweet nature inspires the boys to behave better. When Nat is wrongly accused of theft, Dan takes the blame to protect him. Eventually, the truth comes out when the real thief Jack confesses and leaves the school. The boys, grateful for Dan's kindness, decide to buy him a microscope. Despite growing closer to the Bayers, Dan starts yearning for freedom again, and Mrs. Bayer tries to keep him engaged with various tasks. Towards the end of the story, Demi and Daisy's father, John, falls ill and passes away, leaving Demi feeling a stronger sense of responsibility. The boys wrap up the year with a playful story night where they trick everyone into the schoolroom and only let them out once they share a story. At Thanksgiving, the kids celebrate with a feast made from their garden harvest, reflecting on all they've learned. The night ends with a heartfelt play, bringing everyone together in true Plumfield fashion. The reception of Little Men highlights its potential for a movie adaptation, showcasing why the book's charm and themes could resonate on screen. Critics praised the novel for its heartfelt storytelling and ability to capture the humor and individuality of children, even as some found it overly sentimental or idealistic. Literary scholar William Blackburn noted the impracticality of Plumfield's progressive educational ideals, describing the story as charmingly impossible. This mix of praise and critique reflects the story's endearing appeal and room for modern reinterpretation in a film. Newspapers of the time recognized Little Men as deeply influenced by Louisa May Alcott's real-life experiences, noting that Jo's role as a leader and reformer shines brightly. While some considered it slightly inferior to Little Women, the novel was still celebrated for its charming naturalness, sweet simplicity, and tender sentiment, qualities that could translate beautifully to a cinematic experience. Critics also highlighted how Alcott's realistic portrayal of children's humor and uniqueness set her apart, and her educational philosophy offered an inspiring, if idealistic, vision. This mix of entertainment and moral lessons would appeal to modern audiences, especially when paired with today's appetite for nostalgic yet meaningful storytelling. The book's ability to entertain both young and old, particularly boys, was another strong point in reviews. While some saw it as a delightful work for younger readers, others believed its themes of growth, education, and individuality had universal appeal. A film adaptation could build on this by reimagining the story for a wider audience, much like Greta Gerwig's Little Women brought fresh energy to Alcott's classic tale. And that's that for today's video. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one. Your suggestions for future videos are always welcome in the comments below.